Introduction, and then Shiva Kumarji, we give it over to him. 15 seconds of silence. A few words about Shiva Kumarji. Shiva Kumarji grew up in Kerala among Thamis, Telugu, and Malayalam speaking communities. As he grew up, he was fascinated with science and technology and how they can make our lives better. The science and technology that he learned as a child has helped make our session also so beautiful in the morning. So he started his career with a degree of mechanical engineering and as a computer-aided design engineer, and worked in the industrial world for 5 years, engaging in design, quality assurance, and technical negotiations with clients. Very soon, he saw that without the deeper spiritual values, science and technology loses its direction and purpose. So, he decided to take a break from work and started engaging himself in full-time study and practice of Indian spirituality, especially the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Since 2001, he has been working in the fields of education and youth through Sri Aurobindo Society at Puducherry. He strives to find ways and means of applying spirituality into the very aspects of life. Thank you, Shiva Kumarji, for being part of these sessions. Over to Shiva Kumarji. Pranam to you.
Warmer welcome to every one of you. When I was working in the field of engineering, we used to construct huge machineries. I was in an engineering firm which used to manufacture big machines that are supposed to contain chemicals at high temperature and high pressure. And therefore, we have to very carefully design, we have to very carefully select the material with which those vessels, pressure vessels, will be made of. And I still remember at that time when we are choosing the materials, we will find ourselves so intimate with the materials because we know the properties of the material. You must have heard of steel, right? So there is one type of steel which we call it as a stainless steel. You know why we call it as stainless steel? Because even if you expose to the rough atmosphere, it will not form stain, it will not rust away. And there is another type of steel which we call it as forged steel, meaning it can withstand a large amount of pressure. And whenever we came across such metals, we used to say, oh, this material has got such brilliant properties. This material is so strong. So we were almost familiarizing ourselves with the metals as if we are familiarizing ourselves with the people. And later, after I started reading Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, to entering into the field of spirituality, I found this is very similar. In engineering, we are trying to figure out how the metals and the other matter behave, their characteristics, understanding, noting down. Well, in spirituality, it's not only the material things, but you will also have to figure out the people around you. What do they like? How do they grow best? What is it that we can do to draw the best out of them? So when somebody asked me, oh, you have left engineering to come to spirituality? I said, no, there was no leaving. In fact, I have added the human dimension to my earlier focus, which was only on steels and pressure vessels. So in a certain sense, I said engineering was undergraduation, spirituality is post-graduation for me. And it is beautiful because in spirituality, you include the material world, matter and its property also. And it is in and through spirituality that we truly learn to respect matter, because matter is not looked up with a very narrow vision of ourselves. We look at matter and interact with it in all the dimensions that we are capable of. And that is when I came to know that by being a spiritual engineer, you enter into a way of looking at things, but not just with physical eyes, not just with microscope and telescope and other gadget, but with something which is deeper within us. And the instrument, the faculty that we use is the faculty of intuition. So you remember in the morning, we saw how do we use this faculty of intuition in order to connect with things. We took the example of a flower and we saw how do we connect it, because it is not just with the physical eyes, but we step back into ourselves, enter into the fourth dimension. We are not just in the physical body, we are not in the emotions, we are not in our mind, but from a deeper, the inner dimension. And then when we saw from there, the vision that sees from that dimension is called intuition. And through this intuition, when we reach out to that flower, the first thing that we see is that flower is not just a flower, but it is an expression of an infinite intelligence. Just imagine how will an object feel if we look at it as an expression of infinite intelligence. So a rose flower is not produced just by a rose plant, but it is actually produced by an infinite intelligence and with the completest attention given to that flower by that infinite intelligence. Sri Aurobindo somewhere says very poetically that the force which sent Jupiter into the spaces is the same force which uses all its cunning, its energy, in order to design the curl of a girl who has a curly hair. Now, something that manages the same universe with all its mighty power, with all that power, it pays full attention even to design that one strand of hair which is there on our head. Now, when we look at that with this vision, that it is an expression of that infinite intelligence, then we have the possibility of entering into it in a deeper way, connecting with it in a deeper way. And that is what we saw, the step 2. Intuition, through a flash of deeper intelligence we see, and through that the next step is to connect with things. And when we connect with things, do you remember the word that we used for this type of a connection? It starts with I. What did we say? I followed by identification. Yes, it's that we identify. What does it mean when we say we identify? We actually become. So when we look at a flower, we become the flower. Just imagine how beautiful it will be when, with this faculty, when we look at a person, we can actually identify with that person. And then what happens? We get to know that person better than he knows about himself. So we can identify with somebody almost to the extent that we can see how his mind works, how he is having his problems, and how if something is blocking his emotions, emotional expression, whether he is having some bodies in the physicality, all become visible to that intuitive side. And when we can know the person better than he knows himself, we will be able to help that person to be the best he or she can be. And this is the only way in which we can actually help the whole world to become a better place once we activate the faculty of intuition. And next we can identify with it. Then we open up to all the dimensions of every object here. And that is the second step. And the third step is when we do that, the experience is so enriching, it is transformational for us. And it in fact changes me as a person, and anybody who has that vision as a person, he gets transformed. Now, there are some people in India who awakened this intuition, and in the modern era, among the scientists of Bharat, there is nobody who is a better example than Srinivasa Ramanujan. It's very close to me because he's born in the same city, very close to the city where I was born, in the city of Erode in Tamil Nadu. So 50 kilometers away from that place, I was born in Tamil Nadu. And Srinivasa Ramanujam, his genius is of a quite different character because his genius is directly connected to intuition, a spiritual intuition. And that is why among the modern times, from the 17th century onwards, if you look at all the scientists whom India has produced, Srinivas Ramanujam stands at the top in embodying the spiritual way of being a scientist. He grew up in Tamil Nadu in a very poor family. He was so poor that after his education, when he was looking for a job, well, he was so interested in mathematics. He never had a formal education in mathematics. He had a very normal schooling. And during that schooling, towards the end of it, he started perceiving some numbers which started occurring to him. And as he started paying more attention to it, all the numbers assumed special character. It's like how we watch cartoon movies now. First time when we watch cartoon movies, all the characters are very unfamiliar to us. But once we start watching, they become familiar, and after some time, they become part of our normal life. And in the same way, Srinivasa Ramanujam opened up to the world of numbers. He started perceiving these numbers in a very intimate way. And for us, what is a number? Morning we struggled. We couldn't even figure out what is one because we were always trying to see one pen, one finger, one apple, but we hardly had any clue about what is that number one. What if that number one becomes your friend and your close friend, and you know the characteristics of that close friend who is one? How will it feel? Now that was the feeling which Ramanujam had, but unfortunately, because of his poor background, he couldn't even purchase notebooks where he can work out the mathematical formulas that he was receiving just like that. So he just had to close his eyes, and in that mental space, formulas which are quite advanced for his era started appearing, and he didn't even have notebooks to write. So what he used to do is he used to go to a nearby temple, which is again an old temple, and the floor of the temple was made out of stone. So he used to take a chalk piece, and as the mathematical formula came to him, they were so alive, they were almost wanting him to express themselves through him. Because when you are with a friend, what does your friend? Does he keep quiet? No, he wants you to do the things which he wants you to do. And the numbers and the theorems, who were Ramanujan's friend, wanted to express themselves. So he will take up a chalk piece and he will start scribbling on the stone floor of the temple, and more used to come. And finally, with lot of effort, he used to get an accounting job in one English man's godown. And poor thing, when he became an accountant there, usually all the accounting in that place was done using something called an abacus. Have you heard of an abacus? Well, after the modern day calculators and computers come, you don't do the calculations with abacus. Abacus gives you the decimal places with which calculation, the arithmetics of bigger numbers could be done very easily. So all the accountants in that shop were using abacus and then adding figures and numbers. And when Ramanujam used to do it, he found that the abacus method is too primitive, too slow for him. His mind was so fast that he stopped using the abacus. He said, no, this is too slow for me. and in his mind he used to do the calculation just like that. But even that did not take up his time. He wanted some papers where he can write the theorems and highly complicated mathematical formulas that come to him. So he was looking for paper he couldn't find. He got one friend in that shop who finally told him, hey, if you go to the godown, there's a lot of packaging material. So why don't you take a little bit of packaging material and use it as a notebook? And he gathered those packaging material, he gathered some papers and then made small notebooks out of him. And then he started writing theorems, which related to some of the fields which the mathematical world has not even started to delve upon. Second one, there are some theorems which he found the answers in the form of a theorem which were considered impossible by the best mathematicians of the world during his time. Now, when he did it, he has already had so many papers that he just kept on writing, but he wanted to share it with the other mathematicians because nobody else around him were able to understand the level of the mathematical formulas and theorem that he was coming with the place where he is being of this background. He couldn't share it with anybody. And when he wanted to publish his things, nobody was even willing to listen to him because of one thing. What was that? When he got a theorem which explains a very mysterious aspect of this universe, because these mathematics theorems are, in a certain sense, solutions to certain problems of this universe, and he used to get theorems which could be called as pure mathematics. Have you heard of pure mathematics? What is pure mathematics? Well, there is applied mathematics and there is a pure mathematics. Applied mathematics is you make use of all the mathematical formulas in so many things of the world, making machineries, figuring out. I have done a lot of applied mathematics when I used to design big pressure vessels. And I used to do it because all that mathematical formulas had an application. But there is an area which does not bother itself with finding applications in the world because these formulas exist in an abstract space. So when you go into that abstract space of the mind, they become very, very concrete and intimate. Otherwise, you will not be able to figure out anything of that abstract nature. And this is called pure mathematics, which is considered to be very difficult because this mathematics doesn't relate to anything that it is in a high abstract realm. So when he wanted to reach out to other pure mathematicians, one person said that why don't you send it to London? Because at that time he lived when the British Raj was in full swing. He was born in 1887. So he lived for 32 years and he had a premature death. But that was the time when the British Raj was in full swing and we were directly under the domination of the British. Somebody told him that in London, there is a group of mathematicians. One mathematician is known in that circle, Professor Hardy. So somebody told him, why don't you send your mathematical theorems to Professor Hardy? Probably he will get back to you and then you can share all your findings with other people. So he sent his notebooks to Professor Hardy. And interestingly, when Professor Hardy received these notebooks, he was astounded because the topics and the areas in which he found those equations, at that time, every mathematician said it is impossible to solve equations like this. Ramanujan has solved it. Even some equations were very futuristic. Mathematics world has not yet started even thinking about it. Ramanujan has already started thinking about it. Now, this was the condition when Professor Hardy saw this. He said, Ramanujan, please come to London, because in India, I know nobody will be able to recognize you. If you come here, let us work together and we can share what you find with all the great mathematicians who are here, who are more knowledgeable than anywhere else in the world. Now, this was the promise. And then Ramanujan, he not only belonged to a very poor family, but he belonged to a very orthodox family where it was considered not a good thing to travel to foreign countries even. So he had to face oppositions, and then finally he reached London, and with Professor Hardy, when he worked out some of the mathematical equation over a period of 5 years, and almost 3,900 equations were worked out by him. All were so beautiful that people were taken aback by the quality of it. In fact, one of the persons said that he is somebody whom, in order to understand him, we will need several decades of work before we figure out the level of the formulas that he came up with. So when he went to London and started working with Hardy, there was a special way in which he used to receive those equations. Now, this is very interesting for all of us to hear. Usually, mathematicians work out things with paper and pen, and they used to work out things in a logically step by step. I'm sure this is how you must be working out in your mathematics class also. And remember, if you miss out any of the steps, you will not get marked from your teacher. So no steps. Even if you get the right answer, if the steps are missing, you will not get marks, because then the teacher will say you got it by fluke, not by mathematics. And interestingly, Ramanujam received the answers without any working out any of the steps in between. And that was the beauty, because of which people had difficulty in understanding him. So they will ask him, how did he get this? Now he will say, well, it came to me. They will say, no, you are bluffing. We need proof. You have to work out the steps, without which we will not accept your theorems. But Ramanujam said, who has the time to work out all these things, because I am getting more and more beautiful formulas. Just to express itself will take a good amount of time, but working out the in-between steps, why don't somebody else does it? And that is when the mathematician said, we will need decades to work out what you have discovered. So in all, in 5 years, Ramanujam has 3 notebooks, big notebooks, where he filled all the notebook with lots and lots of equations of an extraordinarily high degree. And at some point, his friend, Professor Hardy, got a little frustrated. Ramanujam, you are discovering these mathematical formulas, but without steps, nobody will accept it. You will die without being recognized by anybody. But then, how do you know that it is right if you don't work out the steps? And that was when Ramanujam said, well, you have to understand how I receive. And then Hardy says, well, how do you get this? We get a formula by working out the steps. How do you get it? And that was the time he said, well, I get it from my Ishta Devata, the God I worship, and the name which he has given to that God is Namagiri. So he says that God gives me, reveals to me these formulas, and they are nothing but an expression of a thought of a God. And only when I feel that this is an expression of a thought of a God, I don't consider them as equations. And this is the most beautiful thing he has said. An equation for me has no meaning unless it represents a thought of God. Why? because it is God who is maintaining this universe. He alone knows the mysteries of this universe. And this is a beautiful conversation which I wanted to share with you. This small video clipping from a latest Hollywood movie which came under the name The Man Who Knew Infinity, the life of Ramanujan. And this is the small clip, his conversation with the Professor Hardy, one of the greatest mathematician of that time from the Oxford University. The person whom you see on the screen was acting the role of Srinivasa Ramanujan, and this is the conversation which happened in the Oxford, London.
You wanted to know how I get my ideas? My God. Hamakiri. She speaks to me. Puts formulas on my tongue when I sleep. Sometimes when I pray. Do you believe me? Because if you are my friend, then you will know that I'm telling you the truth. If you are truly my friend,
but I don't believe in God. I don't believe in anything I can't prove.
Then you can't believe in me. Don't you see? An equation has no meaning to me unless it expresses a thought of God.
I will play the last sentence where he says this beautiful sentence where he says, an equation has no meaning to me unless it expresses a thought of God. So beautiful, because if mathematics is not an expression of a thought of God, then he says it doesn't interest me. Then it maybe you may be calling it as mathematics, but it is of no value to me. And that was the beauty of Srinivas Ramanujan. When he was in England, he was coming from such a background. He was a pure vegetarian. He was not used to taking care of himself. A lot of people bullied him. They ridiculed him because he comes out with an equation, but he doesn't bother to work out the steps which lead to the proof of that equation. And he was undergoing a lot of hardships, but in spite of that, his single focus was revealing more and more of mathematics until one day he contracts tuberculosis, and then he is forced to return to India. But when he came back to India, he lived only for one more year. And in that one more year, of course, his association with Professor Hardy was very less. But interestingly, he left his body after coming back from England when he was only 32 years old in 1920. All exactly 100 years before this current year, he left his body, but he had left in 3 books full of mathematical equation. But recently, 56 years after his death in 1976, they found one more book which he had used in his last year, and this was called the 4th book of Srinivasa Ramanujan, and it contained the equations which are in 2020. It concerned about things which are relevant and contemporary. Now, this is what one person set it up. Professor Burnt is his name. He set it up his task in order to prove all the theories. Theorems were given, equations were given, but no proof was given. So he started working, and only in 2011, he was able to complete and establish conclusively that all of Ramanujan's theorem are original, authentic discoveries, and he was able to produce the proof of all that. Now, this is interesting because this is what he said, our Professor Bent, that from 87 to 2011, for almost 40 years, he set to proving all Ramanujam's theory, and only after that, in 2011, Ramanujam became intelligible even to the greatest mathematicians of the world. And that was when they really started appreciating the work he did. And in fact, the formulas discovered from his last notebook, which was written in 1920, it contained formulas related to the behavior of black holes, which is quite a modern phenomena, and we discovered black holes only quite recently. Now, how was he able to foresee in his mind the black holes and discover formulas related to that black holes? It is an amazing thing that he did. And in fact, his own friend, Professor Hardy, when Ramanujam passed away, he expressed his working with Ramanujam over the 5 years like this. Professor Hardy said, Ramanujan's insight into formula was quite amazing and altogether beyond anything I have met with in any European mathematician. It is not extravagant to suppose that he might have become the greatest mathematician of his time if people were able to understand him. So it was too far into the future, even for the mathematicians of his own time, in fact, to understand. Only Professor Hardy, who himself did not believe in God, he could not deny what he was seeing right in front of him, because Ramanujam, when he sits in front of him, formula after formulas used to come like that. One very interesting incident which happened when Ramanujam was in England with Professor Hardy. Of course, he was unwell, so he was lying down on his bed. So at that time, Hardy comes to see him by a taxi. So he's a mathematician. He is used to notice numbers. So he just happens to look at the number of the taxi, and the number of the taxi was 1729. Interesting. 1729, which is not a special number at all. And therefore, Hardy came into where Ramanujan was lying and just said, well, I came by a taxi. It had a most uninteresting number, just like the driver who was driving the taxi. He was also very uninteresting. So Ramanujan asked, what is that number? So Hardy says, well, it is 1729. The moment Ramanujan hears this, he said, 1729? Well, you said it is an uninteresting number. No, it is not an uninteresting number. It is a very interesting number. Why? It is the smallest number expressible as the sum of two cubes in two different ways. Now it has gone above my head even to hear what it is. How did he know? So you take up two cubes. You know what is a cube and square? If we say 2 square, how much is it? 4. If we say 2 cube, how much will it be? 8. Now, you take two numbers, you cube them, and then you add them, you will get 1729. You take another two number, cube them, add them, and you will get the same number. And this is the smallest number that can be arrived in this particular method. Now, Hardy was blown away by that. How did he know? He said, I know that number. Why? It's familiar. So his interaction with the number was so familiar that one of the fellow mathematicians, in fact, he had an interesting thing to say. He said, for Ramanujam, all the numbers are, the integers are like his friends. And what do friends do? They talk, they explain themselves, and therefore you just have to say a number and immediately Ramanujam is so familiar with the numbers, he gets the story of that number just like that. Now that was a beauty. Why his thing was special is when he was alive, there was only 1 or 2 people understood his worth. But during his last year in London, in Cambridge, his friend Hardy was constantly asking him that take up one particular theorem which is considered to be almost impossible to solve, which he has already solved it. So he asked him, can you please come up, work out a proof, work out a proof, work out a proof. And finally Ramanujam said, okay, I will work it out. And he works out the proof and gives it, which Hardy, Professor Hardy shares with the mathematics body in London. And when he shares with that mathematical formula with that body, the entire forum of mathematicians were quite taken aback by the quality and the brilliance of the work. Now, what I'm going to show in my next clipping is the speech given by Professor Hardy after Ramanujam was recognized as one of the great mathematicians. So here is the clip. It's a beautiful clip where Professor Hardy talks about Ramanujam in a very glowing, in a very beautiful way to put his genius in the right perspective. The background of this is, until that time, all the great mathematicians were ridiculing Ramanujam. And then finally, one equation, he produced a proof and he presented it to all the great mathematicians. And then he said, well, you see, this is Ramanujam. And that is one of the beautiful clippings from that particular movie.
So, now we see the work on partitions and the enormous breakthrough that has been achieved.
Now, what is called a partition is a particular mathematical calculation. And during that time, everybody thought that it is impossible to do this calculation in the form of a formula. And Ramanujam has just like that done it. And Hardy, Professor Hardy, demonstrates what Ramanujam has come up with the entire group, and then he says few things about Ramanujan.
And the enormous breakthrough that has been achieved. All this, mind you, by a man whose limitations of knowledge when I met him were as startling as was its profundity. Opinions may differ as to the importance of Ramanujan's work and the influence it may or may not have on the mathematics of the future, but one gift it does show is its profound and invincible originality. Mr. Littlewood once told me that every positive integer is one of Ramanujan's personal friends.
This is the one that I mentioned. What is an integer? Everybody know integer is the whole number. Positive integer is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Negative integers means -1, -2, -3, -4. And he says every number is Ramanujan's personal friend, and that is the relationship he had with these numbers.
I believe this to be true. He told me that an equation for him had no meaning unless it expressed a thought of God. Well, despite everything in my being set to the contrary, perhaps he is right. For is this not exactly our justification for pure mathematics? We are merely explorers of infinity in the pursuit of absolute perfection. We do not invent these formulae, they already exist and lie in wait for only the very brightest of minds, like Ramanujan, ever to divine and prove. So, in the end, I have been forced to consider, who are we to question Ramanujan, let alone God? Thank you.
it's so interesting because he says, even a hardcore mathematician says, all these formulas exist in the universe and they just reveal themselves to mathematicians, and that is how we usually get these mathematical equations. And he said Ramanujam was one person who was receiving this equation through intuition directly from what he called as his God. Now, I'm just looking for any comments. Why not negative integers? Sir, it is such a good speech by Professor. Has he written anything about how he developed this connect with God? It's an interesting question. And this is a question that somebody said, is it the original video or a movie? This is from a movie which came out a few years back under the title, The Man Who Knew Infinity. So it is acted out, and the whole movie is, you can watch it, perhaps Netflix will be having it. And it's a little sad also because of the struggle that Ramanujan went through in order to just to be accepted by the mathematicians, and also the struggle in family friend as well as with the mathematicians in England, as well as his battle with his own illnesses. He was not keeping well physically also, and in spite of it all, his genius shone through. And finally, somebody is asking, can you play the clip again? Kumar Samyak, did you miss it? All right. So I will play that clip once again in case you missed it. So the background is Ramanujan proved something which was considered impossible to prove, and then Professor Hardy presents it to all the mathematicians, and then he says that even though Professor Hardy himself doesn't believe in God, but when he looks at Ramanujan right in front of him, telling that my God reveals all these formula to me through intuition, well, he couldn't deny. And that's why finally he says, who are we to question the thought of God, which expresses as in mathematical formula, and who are we to question if there is a God or not, because these are beyond our capacity. So because it's just a small clip, I'm going to play it once again.
So, now we see the work on partitions and the enormous breakthrough that has been achieved. All this, mind you, by a man whose limitations of knowledge when I met him were as startling as was its profundity. Opinions may differ as to the importance of Ramanujan's work and the influence it may or may not have on the mathematics of the future, but one gift it does show is its profound and invincible originality. Mr. Littlewood once told me that every positive integer is one of Ramanujan's personal friends. I believe this to be true. He told me that an equation for him had no meaning unless it expressed a thought of God. Well, despite everything in my being set to the contrary, perhaps he is right. For is this not exactly our justification for pure mathematics? We are merely explorers of infinity in the pursuit of absolute perfection. We do not invent these formulae, they already exist and lie in wait for only the very brightest of minds, like Ramanujan, ever to divine and prove. So, in the end, I have been forced to consider, who are we to question Ramanujan, let alone God? Thank you.
Well, that was Ramanujan, and he is considered to be one of the greatest mathematicians that India has ever produced. And in fact, even to this day, some of his equations are so advanced, so futuristic, that they have opened new branches of science and people are still researching in those fields because Ramanujam has opened the doors of all the new researchers in this area. Now, somebody asks, how did Ramanujam died? Well, when he was in England, he was not taking care of himself properly. He was not eating well. He was exposed to the cold, and the people around him were hardly aware that he was vegetarian. So at that time, almost everybody was eating non-vegetarian food. He hardly got vegetarian food. And at that time, there was also outwardly a kind of a war was also going on, because of which he couldn't get even proper food to eat. And in that cold condition, he acquired tuberculosis, what we call as a TB. And that TB, well, somebody has asked what is profundity. Profundity means depth of knowledge. When he acquired TB and England, conditions being very cold, once the mathematicians in London recognized the merit of his work, once he was accepted, he just shared his formulas with them and he just wanted to come back because his heart was in India. And that is how he came back. But he was already in an advanced stage of TB. But he lived for only 1 more year. And in that 1 more year, he further discovered equations which are now helpful in figuring out the black hole, which is a very modern concept. So Aryavardhan wants to share something, and Anusha Tandon also wants to ask something. So we will start with Aryavardhan, where are you? Can you do one thumbs up, digital thumbs? You're already there. Okay.
Sir?
Yes, Arya, we can hear you.
Sir, I don't want to share anything. I want to ask something.
Sure, go ahead and ask.
Sir, what was the birth of date of Ramanujan?
Oh, I know the year was 1887, but if you want to know the birthday, it was 22nd December 1887.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Anusha?
Sir, Ramanujan said that every positive integer was his friend. Why not negative integers?
Well, interesting. The negative things don't really exist, do they?
No.
Positives, 1. You are missing 1. Suppose you have an apple, let us say. It's a positive. You have 1 apple means it's positive 1.
Yes,
if
sir.
I take away that apple, you will be missing the apple, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So you are just missing something. It is the absence of something. It is not something that exists. So for all the positive integers, well, if you take them, the missing part is called the negative one. It is an abstract mathematical concept. In fact, it is like a shadow. When you stand, you have a shadow, right? Is the shadow real? No. And interestingly, if you were not there, the shadow will not be there. The shadow is the absence of you very particularly highlighted. So I would say shadow is a highlighted absence of yourself. In the same way, +1 is something that exists. 1. -1 is something which is lacking. So when the +1 is taken away, its shadow, its absence is -1.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right. So then we cannot have negative number of apples. There, Yuvraj explains still better. So if I say you have 1 positive number of apples, which means that we can't say that you have 1 negative number of apple. We cannot have -1 apple. Yes. So you can't have friendship with what doesn't exist. That is why for Ramanujam, all the positive integers were his personal friends. So interesting. One question I saw, how was he able, did he explain the method or the technique? Yes, in one place he says that every day in the morning when he wakes up, he invokes his goddess Namagiri, and after the invocation, when the invocation ends, when his mind is calm and quiet, the equations start dropping one by one. And it is interesting because it gives us an idea of first opening oneself to a higher consciousness, a Godhead. And once we open up, if we keep quiet and allow the God to express its thought. For Ramanujan, the God expressed his thought as mathematical equation. To an artist, the same God will express itself in the form of beautiful images as paintings. And depending on each one of us, the way we open up to a higher dimension of ourselves, that Godhead will express itself in a particular way. And in fact, all that we have here right now, poetry, music, dance, drama, physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, everything can be actually received by us in this particular way. Now, Shashwat has another question. So I'm unmuting Shashwat Vikram.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, why did Ramanujan was dead in such a premature age of 32?
Because he was not taking care of himself physically. You see, these people are such a genius. Sometimes their genius is so overwhelming that it is too much. In fact, I tell you, at 32 years he died, and we are struggling with 4 of his notebook. What would have happened if he lived to be 100 years and he has left 50 notebooks? We will be scratching our head all over. So probably he was too ahead for his time, and something, the higher power probably also had a role. What he has shared till that particular time itself was too advanced. In fact, only 6 years back, we were able to figure out what he has written almost 100 years back. And we are yet to apply them completely in new branches of science, which came into existence because of Ramanujan's equations. That was how powerful. In fact, some of the genius, if you see, because they are so far ahead, some of them has left us quite early. Even Swami Vivekananda, he did not live a full life. He said that I came for a particular work, and as soon as the work is over, there is no point in overloading the world with too much knowledge or too much power. The world has to assimilate what these genius people have shared with them. And even Swami Vivekananda also died very early. If I remember correctly, he lived to either 32 years or 42 years.
Sir, one last question, sir.
Okay,
sir.
1 second. Let me just look up. 63 to 73, 83, 93, 39 years. So Swami Vivekananda did not even live to be 40. Just imagine, at least Ramanujan lived up to 32 years quite early. Swami Vivekananda lived up to 39 years, but they have done one lifetime's work in that few years. All right, so who would like to ask?
Sir, one more last question, sir. Last question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, Namagiri is a real god, or just it was created by Ramanujan?
No, he
created his own god.
No, it was his family deity. In fact, we cannot create God. We can only look at a God in a particular form which our mind is open to. So it's an interesting thing. Gods are powers, but the way we want to look at them, they are capable of showing themselves, because sometimes we will recognize a God if we get to see that God in a familiar form. It's easier for us to relate, because as a power, they are too powerful, so they can appear in a human figure for us people. Suppose for us, if somebody comes in the form of a power, comes in the form of human figure, it's easier for me to relate. So that is how the Namagiri was a Godhead, which Ramanujan's, it was the Namagiri was an aspect of Mahalakshmi. So his family.
So,
Yes,
sir,
Shash-
she was the Kuldev type, right?
Exactly, exactly. So it was a form of Mahalakshmi of from an area in Tamil Nadu. So his family used to call Mahalakshmi by the word Namagiri Tayar. Tayar means mother. Mother Namagiri.
Mother.
Mother Namagiri is how he used to address. So somebody else was
Okay.
Kumar
Thank
Samyak.
you, sir.
All right. So I'm unmuting Kumar Samyak, who has been raising his whole of his hand. So Kumar
Am I
Samyak,
audible?
yes, go ahead.
Sir, how many books of Ramanujan are solved till date?
Well, we have kind of solved all of his notebook, including his latest one, the one which was discovered in 1976, just 8-9 years back in 1911, because somebody was working on it for 40 years and able to produce the missing steps to solve what Ramanujam in one step has arrived. So right now we have solved it, but it has to be applied. Now the application of it in various fields of science is going to take more. So we are not yet done with Ramanujam. We are yet to catch up with Ramanujam's mathematical work. All right.
Thank you, sir.
A little bit on what Ramanujam was able to achieve and what is the direction. One way of approaching mathematics is the rigorous way where we work out every steps, every details, and finally the answer that we receive is the correct answer. The other one is, for example, if there are 10 steps needed to solve a problem and the answer is available only on the 10th step, rigorous way is to follow all the steps. Intuitive way is to start with the first step and then suddenly jump to the 10th step and then getting with the answer. Only thing, one who is familiar with the process can use the same method to know whether it is correct or not. But what about people like us who need the step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 before we can understand the 10th step? And we will have the difficulty. And that was the difficulty with Ramanujam, because he did not have the time to explain all the 10 steps. He just jumped into 10 step and gave us the formula. And then unfortunately he left early too. Otherwise probably he himself would have taken the care to work out the intermediate step. But this is one genius. And in fact, this intuition, the power of intuition, can work in any field of science or art. It is just a question of opening the doors of the inner dimension, increasing the inner sensitiveness, and perhaps getting connected with that which is within our heart. That is the most direct way to hook up with intuition. And unfortunately, our materialistic science doesn't give us techniques and methods on how to do it. Well, Sarthak Mishra 7D has a question. After that, Yuvraj also has a question. Right, Sarthak Mishra, go ahead.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
So I wanted to ask that, as you said that Srinivas Ramanujan had belief in pure mathematics. So did he work only on pure mathematics, or he found some equations on application mathematics also?
Well, he was so much into the pure mathematics that almost the entire body of his work were in that pure mathematics area, which is considered to be the specialized area among elite mathematicians.
Sir,
In fact, interestingly, these people who are working in pure mathematicians, most of them looked down upon, why do you want to apply mathematics for everything around you? It has got its own beauty, its own purity, its own elevated status. So they wanted the pure mathematics to remain pure mathematics because they could relate to it. Yes, Sarthak.
Sir, I wanted to ask that no one believed in Ramanujan's work as there were no working. So, sir, wasn't he rewarded for his work even posthumously?
Well, remember, once he decided to produce proof, and that is what Professor Hardy presented in the video that I showed you. And when he presented, the entire Royal Science Forum in London recognized him. They gave him a fellowship. Only after getting this fellowship, only after getting the recognition, Ramanujam decided to come back to India. So during his 5 years, only in the 5th year, towards the end, he was recognized, appreciated, respected, and admired by the mathematicians. And then he said, well, my health is so bad that I just want to go back home. So he came back, but he couldn't live for more than 1 year. And even that 1 year, look at the equations that he came up with. It is helpful in figuring out black holes, which is a modern... Do you people know what is a black hole?
Yes, sir. Sir, it's a mass in the universe that has so much of gravitational force that it sucks everything, even light.
Excellent. See, Shashwat knows, and even Yoshita, Tandon, so many people know black hole. I think now that you know something of the black hole, you are ready to take up Ramanujan's equation and start applying it in figuring out the black hole. Even if some of you also not only, well, Shashwat Vikram is dancing with his hand. So I'm going to ask Shashwat Vikram.
Sir, it's not to us, sir. Black hole is formed when a neutral stars burst, and the force by which the cores burst, there is so much force and gravity in it that it just forms that the other stars also burst into pieces, and that gravity forms into a circle, and inside that forms the black hole.
Excellent. In fact, I tell you, at your age, it's extremely difficult to logically understand what this is, but that is where, if we have a sense and a feel, we can actually understand what is a black hole. So many of you already know, even Sudev Nair knows what is a black hole. Om Tandon. Okay, I'm going to open up Sudev Nair.
Sir, it is like a vacuum cleaner, and we are like the dust
Vacuum chamber
on the floor.
You people are quite advanced scientists. You seem to be knowing so much about black hole. Om Tandon.
Sir, I want to ask a question. Is my audio clear?
Yes.
Sir, at which age Srinivas Ramanujan started giving the mathematical formulas, the equations?
Even when he was in his school, already his interest in mathematics was showing, but there were no advanced schools or mathematics teachers to actually help him out. So by the time he even understood that these are the numbers that want to have friendship with him, want to reveal themselves to him, he has already finished his school, and he couldn't even note down what was coming to him because he was so poor he couldn't purchase even notebooks. And that is why he had to go to the temple, and on the temple ground with chalk pieces, he used to write down things. Now, Yuvraj Singh wants to say something, and after that, probably we can have Sarthak.
Yes, sir. So can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir. So I want to ask that how was he able to discover such advanced concepts in the early times, which are discovered right now, such as the black hole. He already introduced the formula for black holes in the early times, and it is discovered in like in the previous years, and just in a few years later. Right now.
Excellent question, Yuvraj. Black holes were discovered only recently, but does it mean that black holes only happened when they were discovered, or black holes existed even before we came to discover them? It's almost like if, say, the very fact that we have not seen something doesn't mean that it was not existing. Black holes were a recent phenomena, or the discovery of black holes is a recent phenomena. Even 1,000 years back, you think no black holes existed?
Sir, it did exist.
It did, but we did not have any way of discovering because we did not have a clue. Our mind was not advanced yet. So when the mind advanced, then we got to know that there is something called a black hole, and then we knew that, hey, Ramanujam's equation is going to be helpful in figuring it out. So black holes were not created recently. They were as old as stars. Any star which has died, got sucked into, so many black holes would have existed. Only we came to know about them recently. So Sarthak, where is Sarthak? Not this Sarthak, but there was another Sarthak. Anybody else would like to? Yes, green Sarthak. Yes, green Sarthak.
Sir, actually, sir, I had two things to say about Ramanujan.
Yes.
Sir, like you told that he left at the age of 32.
Yes.
So, sir, if we consider him a perfect instrument who was able to fulfill the will of the divine.
Yes.
So, after 32 years, when he had fulfilled every will of the divine and he had given all the formulas, so what if he had already fulfilled the actions that the divine wanted and then left his body to, because his actions on the earth were already complete?
Okay, when we talk about the divine is not such a control freak that he previously decide this is how much I want to express through this person, this person, this person. The divine is the entire universe, and the intelligence behind it is the divine. And it is up to us, to the extent that we can open up, to that extent we will receive. And in that opening, Ramanujan's mind opened to that, and therefore it received the formulas, but his body followed the traditions of where he was from. He was not able to eat the food of England properly. He did not have the sufficient care to take care of himself so that he can protect from the intense cold. He was not bold and brave enough, courageous enough to put down the ridicule of all the people in London. So there were a lot of things which were lacking in him too. And he did his best. And with that, till 32 years he lived, and then he passed away when he couldn't take care of himself anymore. But for these 32 years, he lived with his best friends, the positive integers. So he was surrounded with his best friends who are the positive integers, and the numbers were constantly revealing their mysteries to him. Just imagine your life if every second is a discovery of something wonderful, something amazing. That was the world he lived in. Okay. Sarthak, you have one more question?
Yes, sir.
So
like you told about various things when a different person of physics sees a different thing and what they see. So could you tell your thoughts about the relationship between spirituality and mathematics? What do you think? Well,
Ramanujan himself has said that relationship, because mathematics is an expression of a thought of God. See, there are so many mysteries in the universe which we are yet to figure out, isn't it? So all those mysteries in the field of art and music, dance, drama, physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, there are innumerable fields in which we are yet to discover so many mysteries. And sometimes our mind discovers something and very quickly tries to put it up as the truth, and that is an error of the mind. Now, if we take pains to keep the mind a little silently, so that all the mysteries are received by us without any distortion as they are, 100% with original authenticity, then we will be getting those mysterious experiences of the universe directly. So Anusha Tandon has been wanting to say something. She has raised 4 fingers. So I'm unmuting Anusha Tandon.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, when did Ramanujan publish his first book?
When he was in England, and when he was with Professor Hardy, because as long as he was in India, he sent his copies of his notebook to so many mathematicians. Nobody replied. Only person who replied was Professor Hardy from Oxford University in London in England. And then he went there, and in that period of 5 years, that was when he first published one of his papers, and even that was disputed, and finally his friend produced the proof for one equation, and then he became well known among the mathematics circle. So
Sir, in which year?
it was between 1914 to 1919.
Thank you, sir.
Because 1920 he died. Last year he was in India. So he returned to India in 1919. And the 5 years before that was the time he spent in England. Now,
Okay,
Sudev Nair has...
Yes, sir. Sir, when did Ramanujan found the mathematical, Indian Mathematical Society?
Well, I don't know whether he founded any Indian Mathematical Society.
He was the founder.
He was the founder. Well, that is news to me. See, every day we keep learning. I'm sure it must be before 1920. That was the last year in which he left. And before that, 5 years before that, he was practically unknown. So it must be somewhere between 1950 to 1920. But more important for us is the life and what he discovered and how he discovered, rather than all the numbers that, in this year he did it, in this year he did it. So they may be needed in some places, but for us, what do we take from Ramanujan's life? See, sometimes paying attention, too much attention to the minor details takes us away from what...
Basics, I think.
Yes, I'm sure each one of us have something to take. But now I want you to take another Shashwat Vikram's quota is over. So we will have to wait until the next genius of India is a very special one once again. So for the moment, okay, Shivam Singh has been wanting to say something really. Shivam Singh.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, I wanted to ask that what did Ramanujan give to the professor while he was dying in that paper? In the audio clip you show, when he was dying in the hospital, what did he give to the professor in the paper?
It was called partition. In fact, it is one particular formula which was considered to be too difficult for people to solve. Another professor was trying to solve it, and he was taking weeks and weeks of calculation in order to prove one particular formula, which Ramanujam just like that come up with one formula. You enter a number and you will get the results. So to explain what is a partition, it is too complicated for us, but it was considered to be a very long, tedious, almost impossible process, which was actually challenged by one of the mathematicians there, that he challenged Ramanujam that you can't do it with your method because your method is not logical. Only my method, which is logical, but which is too cumbrous, that by that method alone you can arrive at this formula. Ramanujam said, no, I can do it. I can give a proof also. And that is what happened when Hardy presented his paper with the proof, with the logical steps worked out, and then he became known. And after that, he was given a fellowship too. But he is coming from one background where he did not expose himself to the current day mathematical approaches. What we have in the second one, another genius which India has produced, Jagadish Chandra Bose, is somebody who comes from a proper background because he has studied natural science. Now, Jagadish Chandra Bose belongs to which state in India? Who knows? Where is my Bengali person? He is from Bengal. Interestingly, Jagadish Chandra Bose, when he was put in a school by his father, he did not put him in English medium school. He said, unless and until you learn through your mother tongue, there are a few things which you will be missing out. So when Jagadish Chandra Bose was put into a school, in a local medium school, lot of children from the local community came. Among them, there were children from fishermen too. Now, Ramanujam later says that as a child, he grew up listening to the stories of ocean and nature from these other children who come from a background. They are not city-oriented children. And he said, my opening towards nature and understanding the mysteries of the nature started from my childhood. But later, he took up natural sciences as one of his subjects and he started his experimentation in some of the field which were considered to be most difficult, and hardly anybody was doing experiments in those fields. Now, Ramanujam, there are 3 discoveries which are well known in Ramanujam's name. Aryavardhan, what do you want to say?
Sir, can you show the PPT once more? I was not there.
Well, I think we are recording this situation, the entire thing, and later you can see through that recorded video. Okay, Aryavardhan?
Okay, sir.
So we won't take up everybody's time. Now, Jagadish Chandra Bose is a little different from Ramanujam because Jagadish Chandra Bose was not unconventional. What he wanted to prove was something deep and which went beyond what science was able to do at that time, but he wanted to do it in the conventional way through experimentation and proving what he wanted to prove. Now that was the beauty of, but even Jagadish Chandra Bose, when later one of the great Nobel laureate physicists, when he talked about Jagadish Chandra Bose, he said, this particular scientist from India is ahead of his time by at least 60 years. So 50 years after Jagadish Chandra Bose, even now, some of the experiments he has done is not yet taken forward. Now, what did Jagadish Chandra Bose known for? What he is generally known for is, it is because of Jagadish Chandra Bose that we had radio, TV, telecommunications, internet, and even microwave ovens in your houses were possible only because Jagadish Chandra Bose discovered something called microwave. You heard of radio waves and microwaves? Do you know who discovered radio? Who knows? Well, he invented crescograph too, quite advanced. But who invented radio? Marconi. And interestingly, the discovery of radio was possible only with our Jagadish Chandra Bose discovery of microwaves. And it is interesting, microwaves are actually waves which can carry signals through a long distance. And it can carry the signals over a long distance in a remote way. And Jagadish Chandra Bose was able to experiment and then discover these microwaves, because until that time, what is called a radio waves were discovered. Radio waves are waves which are little, you can assume that the waves are a little big. Microwaves are waves that can penetrate even objects and communicate, even if there is any barrier in between. So what Jagadish Chandra Bose did was, he wanted to demonstrate that a signal can be sent remotely, and he did it as an experiment in Kolkata for the public, where remotely he detonated one gunpowder and also rang a bell. So he was far away from the place where a bell was kept. He was far away from a place where a gunpowder was kept. And by sending this microwaves, he was able to ring a bell and he was able to make the gunpowder explode with the help of the microwave, because of which all the other scientists got a clue that we can actually send signals through a form of electromagnetic waves. That is what microwave is. And because of which Marconi discovered radio, and later TV was discovered, internet became possible, several discoveries were possible, but it is not this that I wanted to share. what I wanted to share was what J.C. Bose did in terms of what we ourselves discovered in the morning. You see, what we discovered in the morning was the material scientists are looking at things in a material way. They have not gone beyond matter, because beyond matter, there is a vital energy, a life energy which is there. One doubt, Anusha has a doubt. Anusha, can you type out? Pranav Hebelia. All right. So we will continue our. What he did, Jagadish Chandra Bose, was amazing. What he did was, he was one of the first scientists to break through. Remember, in the morning, we saw all the material scientists were on the verge of matter. Then when they reached the edge of the matter, they entered into a quantum world and then they got lost. So beyond this material world, there is a world which is familiar for all of us, which is the world of emotions and life energy, where biology also has a little introduction. We call it as life energy. In fact, it is the life energy which in a certain sense moves in life organism, because of which life appeared on earth. Remember the evolution story? Once upon a time, there were no life on earth, and then suddenly plants appeared. How did it appear? When a new energy called life energy started moving matter, the matter started behaving differently. It became an organism. Simple enough. Once upon a time, only matter was there. Then a new type of energy entered. We call it as life energy. When they entered, this life energy started moving matter in a particular way, and we started calling it as organic matter. And this organic matter started creating life forms, and this energy was behind the creation. Now, our material science has not yet reached, because material science is focusing its attention only on matter, material forces, physical forces, but not on the life forces, which is very, very subtle. Jagadish Chandra Bose was one of the first scientists who broke through this barrier, entered into contact with the life energy, and was able to demonstrate that this life energy is there functioning in all of matter. So he said, matter is not dead. Matter is not inert. You can't say that matter doesn't respond to us. Like if I poke at you, you will respond. Probably you will poke back at me. You poke at a stone, will the stone poke back at you? No, they will not. But you poke at a dog, the dog will respond. So all life forms have the capacity to respond. But matter is supposed to be dead or inert. And Jagadish Chandra Bose was the first to prove that even in matter, when you expose matter to certain stimulus, the matter responds the same way as animals respond, same way as human beings respond. Interesting. Now, this is something that he did it even in certain metals, because when we expose the metal to stress and strain, for example, if somebody comes and then pressurizes you, like catches hold of you and starts squeezing you, you will become a little hard, and then you will want to recover from that harshness, isn't it? It was the same thing that was happening in so-called dead matter too. The matter, the metal was able to respond positively to good touches, and it used to shrink and rebel against touches which are meant to break the material, the matter which he was. Now, he was able to show that matter also can respond positively to if you handle it with care. And it wants to shrink and rebel if you mistreat it. Now that was a phenomenal discovery, because this is something which Mother says, that if we treat matter, material things with care, they can respond to us. So much so that if suppose my pen, if I take good care of my pen, I love it, and then I take good care of it, a pen which is supposed to come work for 5 years can easily work for 10 years because it begins to respond itself so positively, and that is possible. Now, the implication of what Jagadish Chandra Bose did was so phenomenal. He said that the matter, so-called dead matter, also can respond to stimulus. Now, even greater than that discovery was the discovery that not only matter, but even plants have similar reaction to good touch and bad touch. Now, that was another phenomenal discovery, which recently I came across so many people doing the same research. There was in one school, they had kept 2 flower pots and in different entry points. And through one point, all the people who are going through that one flower pot is supposed to say something bad to the plant, like probably shout at it and then say some bad words and go. Another plant, the persons who are going right next to it is supposed to say something nice and beautiful things to it. And then when they observed, very soon, the plant which was exposed to bad vibration, bad words and shouting withered very fast. And the other plant which was exposed to care, concern and love was flourishing beautifully. Now, this is a modern experiment, but the root of it was in Jagadish Chandra Bose when he did the plant research, that plants have responses similar to you and I have, a nervous response. Remember, if somebody comes to you with the intent to harm you, you immediately shrink back. In the same way, if you approach a plant with a bad intention or intention to harm it, the plants can sense it, feel it, and respond to it. In the same way, if you approach it with love, care, concern, it even opens and reaches out to you. I still remember, because as children, it's easier that we have such experiences. So in my childhood town, we used to have a festival where once in a year, all the people in our town, we used to gather at a temple, and 20-25 of us will sow sprouts in flower pots, in small pots. We will keep it in the middle, and then we will start dancing around it for 15 days continuously at the night time between 9 and 12 o'clock. So the temple was right next to my house, and 9 o'clock we will gather there, and the sprouts were put in pots, and then we will start dancing and singing around it. And you will be amazed to know that the type of growth that happens for that sprouts will be 10 times faster and greater than the normal rate of growth anywhere else. And 3 hours of exposing beauty. Now, the beautiful thing is, we ourselves used to compose songs, we ourselves used to choreograph the steps, and we will practice a little bit, and then 20-25 of us, for 3 hours, we will go around it, and the plants used to respond so beautifully. It's such an indication that they are ready to respond, provided we can show a little bit of care and concern. But a more amazing thing, almost like a fantasy story, was in my childhood when somebody has gifted a rose plant to me. So that was a precious thing for me, because I was able to water it every day, and I was able to watch it grow, and I was waiting for it to give me one rose flower. But you know, when we were children, we are so impatient that I wanted even that small little plant to give me lots and lots of roses, but it was not happening. But one day, very close to my birthday, just the day before my birthday, at night, I went to the plant. I still remember as a child, because usually in the evening time, I will go to the plant and I will have a conversation with the plant. I will tell, you know, what happened in the classroom, whom I fought with, and what good happened. For me, the plant was something which is so alive, and it was my friend actually. So on this particular day, one day before my birthday, I told the plant, I had even named it something which I have forgotten. I said, you see, tomorrow is birthday. You have to give me one flower, one rose for tomorrow's birthday. Otherwise, I won't talk to you from next day. And then I went to sleep. And the next day morning, when I woke up, Can you tell me what I found? There was one small rose which has come in that tiny plant, which is not yet ready to give the flower, but it has already come. For me as a child, it was natural. We never thought about it. But if the same thing were happened to me, that will be a little surprising, because we have got a lot of theories into our head that no, plants, we cannot interact with them, they will not respond to us. And what is natural phenomena when we were children, the natural connection with the plant is, it's extremely difficult to enhance it by using only materialistic scientific way, because it confines itself only to the observations of matter and material related things. Jagadish Chandra Bose was one of the first to break through, and then he said he entered and gained entry into that energy which he called as life energy, and then showed that wherever that life energy is present in matter, plant, or even in metals, there is something in them which can respond to stimuli from outside. There is a kind of a capacity to respond. What we call in our spiritual language, there is a consciousness in everything that can respond in a different way. That consciousness in human beings, it will respond in a different way. In plants, animals, it will respond in a different way. Even in matter, it still can respond, but in a different way. Now, this, in a certain sense, was a phenomenal discovery, not only made by Jagadish Chandra Bose, he demonstrated it when at that time in India, people were not into demonstrating things because there were no sophisticated devices available. With some simple, ingenious methods, he was able to demonstrate and get it accepted, but it was so mind-blowing. Remember, when the scientists reached the quantum world, they were blown away. Beyond the quantum world, inside matter, there is a world of life energy too. Now that is what Jagadish Chandra Bose has discovered. But in India, the science, spiritual science says that there are more energies there in matter. Beyond the life energy, there is a mind energy also is there. Look at us. We are also matter. In us, there is a life energy, and the science has not yet reached out to it. Beyond the life energy, we have lots of mind energy also, thought energy, and the science has not yet reached out. And beyond even this thought energy, there is a deeper spiritual energy, and this, to the spiritual scientist, becomes an area through which we can access. And unfortunately, there were not many people who took up the experiments and the line of science which Jagadish Chandra Bose did in almost 80 years back, because Jagadish Chandra Bose left his body in 1937. In 1937, by that time itself, we had this scientific knowledge that beyond the material energy inside, there is a life energy which can respond to good touch, bad touch, to stimulus from outside. But nobody did a further experiment to discover the mind energy when all of us are carrying it within ourselves, and it will take a long time before science can discover the spiritual energy too. But the two people whom we saw today, Ramanujan and Jagadish Chandra Bose, stand out as the possibility of material science and spiritual science coming together, and in such a way that spiritual science is a culmination of material science. We will pause because we just have to assimilate, take out the central message of what I have shared, and perhaps I hope that many of you, when you become scientists, you will not be just material scientists, but you will bring in the dimension of spirituality too. So we will pause here, and a few questions we will take up, and then we will call it a day, because there are so many things which we have discovered in 2 days. There's a lot of things, and all of which need to be assimilated. Now it's open to questions. In the pre-primary and primary school, we do the same experiment about how plants respond to song and dance and music and care and concern. It's a beautiful thing. And Ridhima says, if we hit a stone, it will hit us hard. This is a very funny incident that took place when Sri Aurobindo was here. Somebody wrote to Sri Aurobindo that, well, I have a bump in my head because Sri Aurobindo asked, what happened? Well, I got hit by a door. So Sri Aurobindo said, what happened? There is some interaction which must have taken place between you and the door before that. Can you remember and tell? Well, Sri Aurobindo said, then the disciple said, one day before when I was going, the door was there, hanging loosely. I just kicked it shut. Then Sri Aurobindo said, if you had kicked the door has every right to kick you back. But that is how conscious they are. They are not the same consciousness which you and I have, because our consciousness can speak also and shout also. When somebody comes to hit, it can say, shout, oh, bachavo or something. But the door cannot shout back, but definitely if you hit the door, it can hit you back. Yes. Sarthak says, same happened with me. See, if we mistreat the object will also mistreat us. If we take care of all the material objects around us, all the material objects around us will take care of us too. How many years did Ramanujam lived in foreign country? 5 years. So Shashwat Vikram, you want to say something?
Sir, I want to ask something, sir.
Yes. So only Shashwat and Anusha and Sarthak are asking, and nobody else is asking anything. Yes, Shashwat.
Sir, did Jagdish Chandra Bose lived long, and when he was born? When is his birthday?
He lived a full life, 77 years probably. He was born in 1858 and he died in 1937, which means how many years did he live? 79 years. So he lived to be an old man. Not like Ramanujam. He lived a full life and did a lot of experiments. And only after him, there were no scientists to take up the further line of his research. All right, open to questions. Anything that we have covered over the last couple of days, because in a certain sense, what we did was science and spirituality, how the possibility of each coming together. And in a certain sense, the spirituality was a culmination of this science. And Anusha Tandon wants to say something. After that, we will go to Sarthak Mishra. Anusha.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, how was the old microwave oven image? How did it look?
Well, even microwave oven technology itself has been changing now. Nowadays, what is called a convective microwave oven, which is a little more advanced. What happens in a microwave is inside the microwave oven, the microwave starts bouncing. As it bounces, it hits the food particle, it penetrates the particle, and then it activates, it charges the food particle so that it gets heated up. So we have to have a mechanism where the food is rotated so that the heating happens more or less uniformly by the microwave inside. Now remember, in order for the microwave to enter into, we need a surrounding place which is made of metal, because microwave bounces off this particular metal. It cannot bounce off the food. It has to penetrate the food. So there is a microwave base, and which is rotating, in which food is kept, surrounded by a surface of metal which can bounce the microwave. So as soon as the microwaves are produced, it is made to fall on food, and then the food gets heated up. So
So how was the first microwave? How did it look?
I don't know how it looked. Probably it might be looking big, and there was a lot of precautionary instructions were given. Especially, I still remember when it came, please do not keep the door open, because what will happen is if the microwaves escape and if it hits us, then we get affected by the microwave because it can penetrate our skin and cause injury. And therefore, one instruction I still remember is not to switch on the microwave oven when the door is open. But the technology is still improving. Nowadays in Japan, I hear that microwave is being banned because of the possible dangers that it can cause. And that is that, but if we use the microwaves for communication purpose, well, they were the basis for you and I using the mobile phones, the radio communication earlier, the TV communication now, and even the internet is based upon the development of the technology of microwaves.
So first microwave was introduced in which year?
Oh, I don't know which year. I will have to look up Google. So these are the information I usually ask Google Dada, and Google Dada tells me, where Shashwat is already showing. Google Shashwat, can you tell us when the first microwave oven was? I will give you 1 minute to give us the answer because he's sitting with a nice tablet. So he's going to ask the tablet and get back to us. Anusha, right. Now, Sarthak Mishra 70, what was your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sir, I wanted to ask that when Srinivas Ramanujan was spiritually connected to his goddess Namagiri, why after getting after telling his equations to the world like Professor Hardy, why didn't he come back to India?
Well, his work with Hardy would not have finished because Hardy is just only a friend. And unless and until what he has given to Hardy is accepted by the mathematics community, it will go to waste. And that is why it took him 5 years to convince other people. First, he tried to get the people accepted him as he was. It was too difficult. And therefore, Hardy was constantly trying to get Ramanujam to come up with a proof. And Ramanujam said, no, I want to get more of theorems which is coming to me out into the world. You people work out. And there was a kind of a fight which was happening between the two friends, Professor Hardy and Ramanujam. And finally, towards the end, Ramanujan made a little extra effort where he was able to give the proof to one particular problem which was considered too difficult to solve. And then he was accepted. He was given what is called a fellowship by the mathematical community over there. And then he decided to come out to India. But then again, he wanted to share his findings with the people because he felt that the God is expressing through himself something for the world. And that is why, in spite of him being not well in his body physically, he felt like giving all the discoveries to the world. It's very selfless of him.
Thank you, sir.
Kumar Samyak. Now, I'm getting questions from new people now. Yes, Kumar Samyak.
Sir, I have a doubt, sir, that Jagdish Chandra Bose was connected by any other gods like Ramanujan?
Jagadish Chandra Bose, interestingly, was a little different from Ramanujan. Ramanujan was directly spiritual and he was talking directly about intuition. But Jagadish Chandra Bose, his mind was intuitive, but he did not want to share with other people what he could intuitively feel because he was a little more grounded in the scientific experimental technology of that time, and therefore he wanted to prove it, which was a little difficult for Ramanujan. So because Jagadish Chandra Bose knew he could demonstrate it and prove it, he took up the task of setting up an experiment and demonstrated his findings. And when he demonstrated, everybody immediately accepted it. They couldn't refuse what he was demonstrating, which didn't happen with Ramanujan. So Jagadish Chandra Bose, even though intuitively he was able, otherwise, why would he think that there is a dimension of life energy hiding inside the matter? You cannot arrive at this conclusion through materialistic scientific methods because materialistic science does not go beyond matter. They got stuck with quantum physics. How did Jagadish Chandra Bose knew that there is a dimension of life energy which is there hiding inside the matter? That is intuition. That is the genius of Jagadish Chandra Bose. He found an experimental technique to prove it, that this life energy, which is there in matter, in plants, even in crystals, which is also part of his experimentation, is able to respond. Wherever there is life, life will respond. People thought, well, life is there only with human beings, but he proved that the response of life can happen in plants, even in matter, in material objects too. We'll take
Sir,
one. Yes.
So the Jagdish Chandra Bose did not believe in God.
He did not talk about God because he did not want to put off the scientific people. It has already happened with Ramanujam. See, even Ramanujam said he was receiving the equations from his god, Namagiri, only to his closest friend. He will not say that to everybody in a scientific community because they are very closed. You remember, they were refusing to go beyond what can be perceived only materially, only
Yes,
what
sir.
is physically. And therefore, sometimes it is wise not to talk about these things to people who are unwilling to believe. When we have proof, we will demonstrate it. Yes. So, Aryavardhan, you will get your video. Of course, it will be shared with you. But let us conclude what we have covered in the couple of days, because when we started our journey in the first session, which was focused on us and how, when I say I'm not just a physical entity. I have emotions too, a vital, I have a mind, and I have a fourth dimensions too. And we went a little beyond that in our yesterday's session, and we saw how the Indian, through stories, the people in India, the true Bharatiya, by connecting themselves with the soul of India, were able to express a certain perfection achieved in the physical space, in the life energy vital space, and in the mental space, and also in the spiritual space. And what they have discovered in the spiritual space, all this discovery is listed out in Vedas and Upanishads and Gita, and recently in the modern times in what Sri Aurobindo has written. And how much has Sri Aurobindo has written? Well, Ramanujam came with 3 or 4 notebooks. Sri Aurobindo came with 40 books. Can you imagine? Even with Ramanujam, we are blown away. Even in 4 notebooks, people very recently even could figure out what Ramanujam has written. And the spiritual scientist of our modern age, Sri Aurobindo, what he has discovered, he has put it in 40 volumes, and with his companion mother also in 17 volumes. Every page of what they have given is the findings of this spiritual scientist who called Pondicherry, the ashram, as a spiritual laboratory. In a certain sense, if we are interested in the greatness of India, in recovering and reviving this greatness of India, Sri Aurobindo and the mother are an excellent source for us to discover, to reconnect with India, and to perhaps elevate India to the glory it deserves. Because this knowledge, if at all somewhere it is available, if there is a possibility of putting it into practice, it is India. And for being a spiritual scientist, if it happens in India, India can be the leader of the world, so that the world also discovers and opens up to all the dimensions of existence, not only to material dimension of existence. And that possibility, to open up to that possibility of living a life at all dimensions here now, was what Sri Aurobindo and the mother wanted to happen. They have also shared with us a lot of ways in which each one of us could happen. And of course, it has to be brought in, this new approach, in our education, in our classrooms, in our homes, in our schools, and finally in our entire society. So we have reached our end. I'm happy that we interacted on some phenomenal topics, and some of them were quite new, some of them were just putting it into place. But remain with this idea.
Shashwat wants to speak.
Yeah, remain with these ideas so that it seeps inside you and it will touch a dimension of you, and then you are going to say that, oh, I already know all that we have discussed in this too, because deep within me there is something which already knows. I've just not really nudged that which is inside me. I've not tried to interact that part within me, and this is the chance for us to nudge the friend who is inside. So let us not keep all the time looking outside and then spending our time outside. Little bit of time let's spend to look inside, get connected with the inner friend, and ask the friend to open the doors of our heart so that a new way of expression emerges from the depth of our hearts. Thank you so much. Over to Anjali ji, and then we will wind up. We have only a couple of minutes left.
Sometimes some speakers just leave us speechless. And that is what you've done, Shivda. You've connected so many beautiful thoughts. You've taken us to the heights of physical perfection through a beautiful video, vital perfection, mental perfection. And Srinivasan Ramanujan, Jagdish Chandra Bose, all these stories have enriched us phenomenally. And all we can say is a real pranam and infinite gratitude to you. Please keep connected with the school. And we really love it. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time to us.
If I get some time, I might try to drop in the concluding session, but there are so many programs going on here too. But I wish you the best. And just
thank you so much. And if you can share some of the clips that you had, like, of course, yeah, it would be nice because we have these TVs in the courtyards, and once in a while we can play these clips. They were very beautiful.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Right. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you, children. Thank you, teachers, for taking out so much time. Thank you.
Yes.